Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. So America is more of a conservative state than people think. If you look at the history of it, right, the Vietnam War and the Phoenix program, we see these intelligence agencies and the military and these conservative groups working together to abuse people. And obviously, when I say conservative, it's not just the Republican Party, it's also the conservatives in the Democratic Party, libertarian. Okay, the people who run America are best described as conservatives because they're trying to preserve the existing social order, right? They're trying to serving the con. Okay, and obviously, conservatives are the ones who want to uphold the governing class agenda, and they confuse you about what they're trying to maintain. Okay, when you have all the kind of rich gays, the rich kind of Republicans, you have the rich feminists, and they have token minorities that they've bred with over the years, and they have this massive sort of family, and they use their family lines, right? Some of them aren't so rich, to make sure things go a certain way. That's what all those social clubs are about. They're about the governing class family lines. Now, I've done a lot of research. I've have thousands of valid sources. Okay, I have like 18,000 plus videos by now in the last 17 years. So when we talk about COINTELPRO, right, 1956 and 1971, I was born in 81. Okay, Martin Luther King was assassinated in 68. The Rodney King riots were in the 90s. The Watts riots around the time Martin Luther King was assassinated, right? It was like 67. So when you look at the timeline, it makes it very, very clear. If you write down the timeline of events and, famous social events of social control like COINTELPRO, right, you see that they like to kind of provoke the black community, the brown community, various communities to violence, okay? And then they say that, hey, these guys are violent and they're a threat to people like the president. That's what this Cole Allen thing was about, right? That they're a threat to people who are military generals, FBI directors. There was an attack on some FBI building, some years back, right? And they like to say that they must, take drastic action and that they shouldn't tell the public what they're doing or that undermines the process. And so, we've seen this case. I've gone on and on about how they're provoking me. I have 23 witnesses to the psychological operation against me, which includes harassment, psychological warfare, provocation, okay, fuming, poisoning, what have you. And we see all this talk about processed foods that came out way after I was talking about how they're fuming and poisoning me, okay? Because they're trying to kind of cover up their tracks by saying, hey, if someone gets sick from this, it might be from this or that, and not from the covert drugging, covert poisoning, okay? And they try to force people on psych meds, and they try to, make it seem like, that psychiatrists can do no wrong, and so on and so forth. So you see this massive effort to try to get you to rely on the experts. And you see, these are logical connections. I'm not stretching this stuff. This is not some conspiracy theory. These are logical connections based on objective facts. There's no other way to look at it. So with COINTELPRO, you see this sort of reaction, this response from the governing class as they use their network to try to preserve the existing social order, and that included countless FBI agents. There were military people working on it. There were police officers, just like you saw with the famous MK Ultra, which incidentally is called Ram Scrambled, right? MK Ultra with a K, right? And you have the Mortal Kombat, and there's the martial connections, right? The word martial is marital scrambled, okay? And Christ is said to be the bridegroom, the champion, the top martial artist, Psalm 18, Psalm 19. Read them both very carefully. God trains his hands for battle, and he's a champion, Psalm 19, the bridegroom, the sun symbolizes him, Psalm 19 verses like 1 through 6 or so. Okay. So these people are a mix of Christian church types, right? And the old money that goes into maintaining those churches, right? A mix of old money families. You feel me pretty heavy here. And they're a mix of LGBT, elitists, right? Because the old elitists from Rome, where, you have the Club of Rome, one of the most powerful social clubs on the planet, okay? The elite of Rome were a bunch of LGBT people. They were a bunch of, eventually become, the Catholic Church, right? The Roman Catholic Church, and they split with the Orthodox. So they became the churches. And from that kind of bad tree was the Protestant movements, right? And so part of their social orders were church orders, right? They're military orders. They're even street gang orders, right? The mafia, the Sopranos and these movies The Godfather. They're trying to make it so you look up to white people who are kind of Roman themed. And the Freemasonic orders, and they're like a secret society that plants people in different places, like law enforcement, police chiefs, the military. It's so common that Freemasons are in the police and the military that they have their own patches for the police. Okay, and their presidents and corporate heads and so on and so forth. So you have this kind of Roman themed society that is, you might say, behind the scenes, but everyone knows about it these days. That's where the Epstein crowd tapped into a little bit. It goes much deeper. There's millions and millions of these people, okay, and basically everybody these days is kind of doing what they say, except for me. So yeah, that one you might be like, huh? But if you look at it, it's straightforward. Like if you're one of these people who isn't part of their psychological operations campaign, there are millions and millions of Americans. I don't know the exact number, but I know for sure there are millions and millions of Americans who work for one of the countless, agencies: Department of Defense, National Security, ICE, CIA, FBI, okay, local law enforcement, right, DEA, county sheriffs. They have these massive networks of assets, like they had it on record in COINTELPRO, where they had the Ghetto Informant Program. They have countless programs out there, and they have this massive sort of control grid, okay? And 9/11, regardless of what you think caused it, their response to it was to have these just millions of Americans working together, trying to control the way people think, so that people don't start thinking like Osama bin Laden or something is the stated argument. But obviously, whether the government, used proxies to do 9/11, I'm not going to speculate. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, okay? One thing's for sure is that it fit right into their agenda. That's the bottom line. Doesn't matter if the boogeyman did it, if Osama did it, or if George Bush planned it himself. That doesn't matter. Bottom line, it doesn't matter so much. Bottom line is that it fit right into their agenda, which is the biggest threat. The biggest threat to America is not terrorists. Say if you live in Chicago, are you scared of a terrorist blowing himself up more than a gang member shooting you or robbing you or raping you, or, And where do these gang members come from? They come from the overall control grid of America. I used to live in California. I hung out with the Crips, Bloods, Norteños. I could tell you for sure, for sure that's how it works. I can tell you with 100% certainty, that's how it works. When these prison gangs get their orders, it's the result of a deal with the prison gang leadership and the CIA and groups like that, okay, in the prisons. Period. There's no other way to look at it. The guards bring in drugs for them, and that's part of their overall network of activities. They try to make it seem like they just talk to a guard. Hey, can you do this for me? I'll give you this money. That's not that easy to do. But when you're in overlapping social clubs and secret societies, when you're in overlapping cults, that's a lot easier to do. That's why it's so widespread. That's why it's so prevalent. There is no other way to look at it. Look at the drug cartels in Mexico, how they merged with the state. Okay, here in America, it's the same thing. It's just the other side of the border. There's these massive drug organizations, human trafficking organizations, pimps, and they overlap with the state. And every once in a while, they throw some of them under the bus, and they tell them to keep their mouths shut. And that, intentionally otherwise causes some confusion in regards to how things work. But what I've witnessed firsthand, okay, I have 23 witnesses on record of the psychological operation against me. I can tell you with 100% certainty, based on objective facts and what I've witnessed myself, okay, that is absolutely and exactly how it works.